starting with Dr. Nritya. When in the timeline should we ask for the blood test and what are the tests that need to be done?
Yeah.
So, go ahead, Dr. Suhas, you want to answer this?
Hello, everyone. Yes. This actually, for mild and moderate cases, unless it is required, there is no in a specific timeline where you should ask for a blood test. Or if you feel, if the child had fever for around 4 or 5 days, it has stopped and again it has started, then you can think of any other infection, then you can order for a blood test. But there is no guideline where in children where you should order for a blood test at this timeline. And yes, and if it is in the case of severe disease, then yes, you have to order those blood tests, and we have to look into it. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Kulkarni. Would you like to give your opinion on this? When in the timeline should we ask for the blood test, and what are the tests that need to be done? You are on mute, Dr. Kulkarni. Please unmute yourself. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Actually, there is no such timeline. You just have to go by your clinical judgment. In mild cases, no tests are required at all. If the child is playing, eating well, and other parameters are normal, there is no fever, no investigations are required. Only if the disease is progressing from mild to moderate, then you have to take help of investigations. If the fever continues beyond 4 or 5 days, as Dr. Suhas has mentioned, if there is a rapid breathing, if the saturations are falling, then you go for investigation. The initial minimum investigations are CBC, CRP, and an X-ray chest would help. And then depending on the clinical situation, then you escalate your list of investigations.
Sure. Thank you. Just on anecdotal note, I'm also getting a lot of questions from family and friends. In fact, they are going self-referred CT scan on day one. And when you try to dissuade them, this is again patient preference. And then they say, oh, if I am very sick, I need a bed. It takes 2 days to get the oxygen bed. So I might do it today only. So God bless them. We are fighting against, on what all fronts are we fighting? Very difficult. So the next question is, in a child with mild symptoms, fever, vomiting, and a high CRP of 90, when should steroid be started? I think Dr. Nalini, you covered it in your presentation.
She's done it very well. Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead, Dr. Nalini.
Actually, Dr. Nalini madam's presentation covered everything.
Everything.
Yes. But we do understand that people have my attention. I'm talking about myself. My attention span is limited, so it's good that we repeat certain things. And this is an important thing. Dr. Nalini, go ahead.
No, sir. Let Dr. Kulkarni, sir.
Dr. Kulkarni.
Okay, fine. Will you please repeat the question, Kamlesh?
In a child with mild symptoms, fever, vomiting, and a high CRP of 90, when should steroids be started?
Steroid should never be started in home setting. The child has to be admitted, has followed up, and unless the oxygen saturations are dipping, steroids are not to be started. Only in a state of hypoxia. And that too, when, as Dr. Nalini mentioned, there is a rapid deterioration in the oxygen status. That is the only indication for starting steroids.
Okay. And so the follow-up question is, what is the steroid of choice in home isolation? Home isolation, no.
No steroids.
No steroid. No steroid.
No steroid. Okay. So the next question is, do we really need markers for pediatric patients in absence of early warning signs, considering wide age group and maturity levels of patient as well as caregivers? Long question. Should I repeat it? Do we really need markers? Yeah. Go ahead, Dr. Kulkarni.
Yeah, we need markers to assess the severity of the disease. Like if a child is having myocardial involvement, these markers really help us to note whether it is increasing or not, and to take proper decisions and proper time. That is the main idea. Otherwise, whenever you need markers, the child is already hospitalized. These markers are not to be done in the home setting.
Yes.
Only in the hospital setting.
Anybody has a different opinion? All agree. Okay. So the next question is from Dr. Mohan Kubendra. What is the recommendation for anticoagulants in moderate cases? Or how do you decide about giving anticoagulants?
Anticoagulants in pediatrics are recommended only in severe cases, and particularly those who are in shock, multi-organ dysfunction. They are not to be used in mild to moderate cases.
Sure. So, like in adults, they are guided by the D-dimer.
Yeah, the same criteria can be used in children also.
In children also, the D-dimer can be the navigating thing. Okay.
Right.
Dr. Jagrati, is there any percentage for transmission of COVID as per trimester?
The first trimester is. We are saying that it's being transmitted in first trimester. So planning of pregnancy is not to be done in this period, during this period. And second and third trimesters, they're not seeing much. But we have seen abortions and stillbirths. So there is a caution on first trimester. That's why they shouldn't be, even the newlyweds, we are asking them to go for contraception during this period.
Okay.
So that is already studied. Some more studies are upcoming because the gynecologist friends have been telling me that they have seen increasing number of abortions and stillbirths during these 2 months.
All right. Thank you. So the next question is from Dr. Rahul Srivastava. His question is, where are these recommendations from? So Dr. Nalini, where did we base all our information from?
It is from the Family Welfare, Ministry of Family Welfare and AFPI, IAP, and a few from the WHO. I based mainly on these three and my own experience and the webinars I have been attending from my Maharashtra IAP and the AIMS webinars. They have helped me a lot in learning things, and my own experience and interactions with different specialists have helped me. And I showed the presentation to Suhas also, and I took his opinion, and a few changes according to him I made.
Sure. So thank you. So you mentioned the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, the Indian Academy of Pediatrics, and then the guidelines from AIMS, etc. WHO. Would you like to add any? Yeah, and of course, I'll come to that. Dr. Suhas, do you want to add anything to this list? And then we'll come to Dr. Kulkarni.
Yeah, most of the cases we are following these guidelines only from IAP and WHO. So almost all of these are covered from there. Yes, and yes, always a personal practice. While practicing, we get our own experience, and from that we learn many things. Sometimes guidelines just guide us, but child-to-child based treatment is the thing which we have to follow.
Correct. So, Dr. Kulkarni, would you like to add any other site or reference?
Just pick up any one guideline and stick to it. If you start looking at several guidelines, you may end up confused and will not be able to do anything. Just follow one particular guideline and be expert in that. That is the only way of doing things.
Right. So thank you very much. Now I'll give you my perspective, because this I consider it as a very important question. Where do you get the information is changing every day? And I had been to Oxford, England for evidence-based medicine. Are we practicing evidence-based medicine? There are 4 things in evidence-based medicine. What is evidence from research or all these guidelines which come? Second is, as all the 3 eminent speakers have said, is the experience. What experience do you develop? Because each patient is different. The third thing is the patient preferences. Some patients will refuse something, some will want to take many more medications than you want. Oh, my sister-in-law, my brother-in-law, my father-in-law, or the child in the neighborhood, he had this medication, that medication also. That goes on. And the fourth is the practice settings. Where are you practicing? What resources are available? Because we are running out of medications, etc. So it's, as Dr. Suhas said, and I'll re-emphasize, guidelines are guidelines. You have to use your own common sense when applying them. And that's why, because all this thing which has been said, yes, you can read it somewhere, but what we are looking at is wisdom from these eminent speakers. Okay, going on to the next question. Uh, what is the incidence of moderate and severe disease in children? So out of 100 patients, how many are severe, how many mild?
Mild are almost 90%, and moderate and severe are the remaining 10%. And MISC is a little higher this time in the second wave. I think the other doctors can emphasize on this. We have
the main reason for more numbers is because the disease is more widespread. The denominator is large, so you get more patients, and that is the only reason. Otherwise, the percentage of children affected is the same as it was in the first wave. Around 10 to 12% is the percentage of total positive cases. It was the same in the first wave, it is the same in the second wave also.
Thank you.
Actually, mild is not actually asymptomatic are more than mild.
Right.
Oh, so generally when we say mild, we probably include the asymptomatic also, because the number will go down. Yeah, correct. Okay. So Dr. Sudarshan, his question is, do we need to do a CT scan in children to get to know the moderate severe involvement of lungs along with clinical parameters and blood tests? If so, when is the ideal time to do the CT scan?
If the illness is protracted and RT-PCR is negative and the inflammatory markers are rising, so I think that's the time when we have to go for a CT test. It's my opinion. I don't know.
CT scan actually is not routinely.
Yes, sir.
CT scan is not routinely required. Yeah, so CT scan is not routinely required. And if RT-PCR is repeatedly negative, then only to establish a diagnosis of COVID-19, you can order a CT scan. Otherwise, even for routine diagnosis management, mostly it is not required. If there is a sudden deterioration of a hospitalized patient, and to know the reason in such a situation, you order a CT scan. Sudden deterioration, or you want to rule out some other diseases like tuberculosis, pneumothorax, or other things, then only you order a CT scan.
Thank you. Dr. Suhas, you want to add something?
As of now, we are following like any child with who is having respiratory distress and drop in saturation, then we are going for a CT scan. And even if chest signs in X-ray, chest X-ray, then we are going for CT scan. We have observed some children like they have chest signs in in the X-ray, they have some inhomogeneous patches here and there. But in CT, I have seen some children with having 17 by 25 score, but they're absolutely fine on room air, no cough. So it is different presentation in children as we have seen here. Yes, whenever we see chest signs in X-ray, we are going for CT, or any deterioration, we are going for CT scan. There is no specific timeline.
Thank you. So next question is from Dr. Rahul Srivastava again. How would you pick up these cases of these children in primary care? I didn't understand. How would you pick up the moderate or severe or the cases of COVID-19 in primary care? I think that was covered.
Covered by Dr. Nalini very well, yes.
So we will have this presentation online, then you can see that. But going on to the next question, Dr. Mohan has asked, what's the logic behind the prediction of increased incidence of infection among pediatric age group in the anticipated third wave? So getting prepared for the third wave. So what is your gut feeling or prediction?
It is more of a rhetoric. Actually, if the patients are more, children will be affected more. There is not a single reason, scientific single reason, which tells us that children will be affected more. They are basing these things on some hypothetical theories, that's all.
Because you see, in the first wave, it was only adults above 65. They weren't worried about anybody else. And now in the second wave, 30s, 40s are also dying suddenly, etc. They have, and now it is coming into children. So that's why children were not there, they say, in the beginning. Now they are coming up. Maybe they were not diagnosed earlier, or we don't know.
It all
So I
depends
think,
on the variables
can I
also.
come in, please?
Yeah,
Sorry, sir.
please.
Go ahead.
So I think
Go ahead.
Dr. Vinayak has brought a very valid point here, while answering to the previous question. So even in first wave, children were affected, and there is no difference from the first wave to second wave as far as involving pediatric age group is concerned. Just sheer the numbers. See, if 10% of pediatric age group is affected, compared to first wave, second wave, the numbers are very high. So when you convert these percentages, probably that is why it is coming into light that a lot of children are being affected. And I think the same holds good for third wave also. This is all these kind of predictions that the next wave is going to affect only pediatric age group. I don't know whether it stands to any logic. Is there any reason by which these kind of predictions are based on?
The children are getting infection from the adults. So it is the bad behavior of the adults that is causing the children to be affected. So our behavior, our gatherings, our interests are causing all the infections in the children. So we are the culprits. So if we don't change our behavior, and even now we don't learn our lessons, definitely our next generations will be affected by us.
Thank you. Next question is from Dr. Anita Ram. Is the left ventricular dysfunction in MISC reversible?
Yes.
Yes.
It is reversible, but it may take up to 6 months for that recovery. And you have to continuously monitor these children with echocardiography.
The next one is MISC possible after vaccination? Now, vaccination of whom? The adults in the family or children we are not vaccinating?
Yes. Vaccination is not there in children, so yes.
Okay, Dr. Narmada has asked the question. Next question is will the RT-PCR report turn positive on first day of fever?
Yes.
And is it really needed for just a day of fever, even after the baby is isolated?
So I'll take that up.
Yeah.
See, actually, the viral load is very high 2 days before the onset of symptoms and on the first day of symptoms. So the possibility of a positive RT-PCR is highest on the first day. And if you delay it, the viral load goes on decreasing, and sometimes it may come negative in spite of the child having COVID-19.
Thank you. So next is Dr. Santosh. How to manage child with typical COVID symptoms but COVID test negative? And probably he's meaning RT-PCR negative.
You have to continuously monitor these children in the first place. Secondly, it may not be COVID because we live in a tropical country where more of tropical infections are also there. So you have to be on the lookout for those infections. You go on investigating for routine for tests for malaria, tests for dengue, tests for because we are getting plenty of these scrub typhus. This is also on the increase. And typhoid fever.
So the next comment is from Dr. Yogendra Shakya, all the way from Nepal. And that's for you, Dr. Nalini. Very informative. End of discussion. So congratulations, Dr. Nalini. Somebody in Nepal has benefited from your presentation. Thank you. So next question is from Dr. Swapna. Is there a role for any prophylactic drugs in children because the vaccine is still not approved? Maybe she's thinking about ivermectin. I don't know.
No drugs. No drugs.
No.
So
no prophylactic drugs.
So Dr. Swapna, 3 wise people have said no drugs. Okay, relax. Dr. Matthew, I have a retropositive child under our care on ATT and ART who developed edema of hands and feet with conjunctivitis, fever and arthritis. LFT, RFT were normal. T-dimer and APTT was high. COVID IgG antibody was negative. She was provisionally diagnosed as MISC and was started on Visolone and other supportive therapy, and she improved in a week with resolution of all symptoms. Should she be tested on a COVID spike protein antibody for confirmation just to be sure, or would the follow-up suffice? Should she be planned for an echo even though she has no cardiac symptoms?
I don't think there is any need to prove a point. The patient is already recovering, and the tests they have already. I mean, RT-PCR was negative, so a spike protein antibody will not tell us definitely that this was because of COVID.
Mm-hmm. Okay, the next question. Oh, Dr. Suhas, you want to add something?
Yes, as I told, if the child is recovering, there is no point doing more investigations on that. Yes, but follow-up echo, if initial echo is normal, I don't think you can just repeat after 2 weeks and you need not think about the echo again.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Matthew, everything cannot be, say, a cookie cutter given to you. You need to follow up and decide accordingly. That's why the treatment changes with every patient. So next question is from Dr. Swapna again. Many patients in nuclear families are worried. Many parents in nuclear families are worried about very young children who cannot be kept away from them, especially in breastfeeding child. Any suggestions for those parents?
Dr. Nalini has covered this also.
Yeah, yes, I think so. Okay, so next question is, Dr. Anita, can intrauterine infections be teratogenic? Now,
we really don't know. Only time will tell us.
Yeah. Agreed. Dr. Soumya, recommendations for children in boarding schools apart from COVID appropriate behavior. Are they safer in boarding schools or at home with their parents?
Are there any boarding schools open today?
I don't know. Dr. Soumya, are you there?
Yeah, actually, my daughter is planning to go to a boarding school, go back to her boarding school. That is where the anxiety as a parent starts. You know, they have, they have their system of triage with all the isolation beds and in-house pediatricians to monitor and secondary and tertiary backup. But, first thing is my daughter is around 13 years. Definitely, we have taught her COVID appropriate behavior. But how do the school manage this? Yeah, the strategies are going to come up. That's what I heard from the central government in a month's time. That's what I wanted to recheck with you all being professionals. If there is a possibility of reopening of boarding schools, that's where the question arises and the anxiety starts.
Mm-hmm.
I think the authorities will wait for the third wave. I mean, whether it really happens or the extent of that wave, if at all it happens, before they take any decision regarding reopening of schools.
Okay, next question.
Here also there is a wait and watch technique.
Yeah.
We have some homes like for destitute children being run, still they are open, but with all the precautions. They keep taking my advice and all. If there is any symptom developing, they ask me for advice. So those homes are running without any casualties since the onset of the first wave. I have been in touch with them. They have some 7 to 8 homes running in Hyderabad, where I am on the advisory board. So they keep calling me with there no casualties at all because they're onto all the precautionary measures are being taken and early recognition is being done. None of the children have fallen sick.
So, Dr. Soumya, this is a big question here in Canada too, with schools or regular schools, not boarding, regular schools opening and in-class teaching, etc. Because parents who are working from home are also fed up of their children at home. And often in Zoom meetings like this, there will be one child coming from one side, another from another side, and demanding, etc. So, and parents working from home, that's a big issue too. And so far, they have not opened. Maybe in June, they will open. It's a very political, social, cultural decision. But I'm happy to note that Dr. Nalini is advising, and so far, whatever she's been advising is working well. There are no outbreaks, etc. Good. So the next question is, from Dr. Nitya, have seen children with GI symptoms and RT-PCR negative resolved with home isolation. Any recommendations of doing a COVID antibody history of contact with the parent in all cases? So if parents have had are COVID positive and children are RT-PCR negative and having loose motions, etc., should be doing an antibody test.
You can assume the child has been positive. That's all.
Yeah. I think so.
There is no need of antibody testing. Antibody testing is required only for MISC confirmation.
Wonderful. Thank you. Dr. Gundappa, a mother with 1.5-year-old child has got COVID. She says the child don't like cow or buffalo milk. Should she stop breastfeeding or continue? So the question is about breastfeeding with a mother who has a 1.5-year-old child.
Continue breastfeeding. The foods also, solid foods have to be increased because it's already 1.5 years. So the solid food intake has to increase and breastfeeding can continue till 2 years.
Agreed.
Done. Next, Dr. Swapna, can routine vaccine be given at the scheduled time if the child has recovered from the illness? Is there a timeline to follow in a COVID recovered time?
1 month is enough.
1 month is enough. Okay. 1 month. And the last question, I think, is can moderate cases managed at CCC, COVID Care Center, I think that stands for. Yeah. Any other suggestions for CCC to manage? Can moderate cases be managed at COVID Care Centers? Any other suggestions for, what is the second part? Dr. Praneeth, are you there? Can you ask the question and elaborate?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yes, sir. So I'm Dr. Praneeth, managing this COVID Care Center in Bangalore. So we had a discussion today about the pediatric cases to be, shifted to the COVID Care Center, thinking about this third wave. So is there any other suggestions? Because in adult cases, we do manage even a moderate cases in COVID Care Center. Is there any specific suggestions regarding the pediatric cases? Can we manage at COVID Care Center? If yes, is there any other suggestions such as what to monitor mainly and look out for because of peaks of time, like lack of beds availability in higher hospitals for the managing cases at that time? What to do? Is there any suggestion?
Sounds like more of an administrative question. So anybody has any thoughts?
Basic parameters will remain the same. If the pediatrician is there looking after children, they can keep the child anywhere.
Thank you. And next is Dr. Nitya again. Can children with mild or moderate symptoms also progress to MISC? Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah. MISC can be seen in active COVID also.
Yes.
So it's not that necessarily that they have to be moderate or severe that they will develop MISC. No.
Sometimes we have to differentiate whether a severe case of COVID is because of COVID or because of MISC. That's a typical and difficult clinical situation. Maybe Dr. Suhas will tell us something.
This has become a challenge these days. Even severe dengue, severe COVID, and MISC, they're all interfering the diagnosis. But always benefit of doubt and treatment is what we have been doing. If it is in shock and if it is life-saving, then we are going to MISC protocol and going ahead with the treatment. It's always benefit of doubt and saving the child there. That is what we are doing.
Thank you very much. So we have finished the questions from the audience. Now time is over, but before we go, I would like to have the last pearls of wisdom from the speakers, starting with Dr. Kulkarni about the practice, what is happening, etc. And very briefly in 1-2 minutes.
Well, we actually are seeing many children. Now, our problem here is that many of the time parents are not willing for carrying out the RT-PCR test. One. Secondly, this COVID is a great masquerader. any symptom we see in the OPD can be because of COVID. Like Dr. Nalini mentioned, it can be just from lethargy, poor feeding, to respiratory or even diarrheal illness. MISC is not so uncommon, at least I have seen 10 patients, but they are also mild. Apart from the classical manifestations of MISC, we are seeing a particular condition which is labeled as febrile inflammatory state, where multi-organ dysfunction is not there, only inflammatory markers are high and child is running very high fever. Sometimes after a gap of maybe 7, 8, 9 days, a short course of steroids need to be given in these children to bring down the fever, once all the other illnesses have been ruled out. That is the underlying thing.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Suhas, any parting pearls of wisdom for family physicians?
Basically, yes. As Sir told, they are presenting in a different spectrum, and every child who is got suspecting COVID is what we are doing. And as a doctor, to all of us as family physicians, please take care of yourself first. Proper mask, double masking is helping me, I am thinking, so it will help everybody. And as of children, as we are seeing, not much of a problem in many of these children. Many are mild and asymptomatic and just contacts, which we have seen. And if it is severe, and it main challenge for family physicians would be picking up the severity and monitoring them, when to refer and what to when to guide them properly.
Thank you, Dr. Suhas.
Yeah, just 2 points I would like to add. Just 2 points.
Okay, go ahead.
A mask has to be very well fitting. Double masking or triple masking will not help if the first mask itself is not a proper fit. So a N95 should be used by every family physician in the OPD. And they should check it for a proper fit by drawing the air inside. And if the mask moves inside and outside with respiration, then you are assured that the fit is proper. Are you understanding what I am trying to say?
Yeah. Very clear.
If the fit is not proper, there is no point in using any N95 also. Because see, the shape of the nose varies. So I find it sometimes very difficult to find a proper fit for myself also. Second point is regarding ventilation in the OPD. Every clinician should put a fan behind him, pushing the air away from him. So that way, if the ventilation is good, the aerosol risk becomes less. Like the patient is in front, I am examining him, I should have a fan behind me so that the air moves away from me.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. Very important points, Dr. Kulkarni, because safety first, as Dr. Suhas mentioned. So, Dr. Nalini, final words of wisdom.
We are, all of us have to work together to ensure a good childhood population. We have to ensure their safety. Not only ourselves, but we have to ensure the safety of the child population, which are the future. And we have to ensure their happy and healthy lives. We are in charge of their lives. So that we have to remember always.
Thank you very much. And maybe we can take 3 comments from the audience. Dr. Mohan, would you like to say something?
Sir, this is Dr. Srinivas.
Yes, Dr. Srinivas.
One comment is we should give a lot of importance to the parents' education. Just now, the session that we have conducted is for the family physicians. And even we, the family physicians, should educate the parents because there is an impending third wave threat. So for meeting that threat, a lot of importance should be given to the education of the parents. That is what I feel. And the responsibility lies upon us itself. And why the third wave, why during the third wave, the children are more affected more. Means that is the international experiences. Moreover, the children are not being vaccinated so far. In the second wave, elderly people, the patients of elderly age group, they were less because they were vaccinated. It is 40% of the elderly people were vaccinated. So we saw the cases, these 30 years like that. So in the third wave, the logic is because the children are not being vaccinated so far, there is every possibility that the children will be affected more.
Sure.
So
thank you.
We have to work from now. We have to
parents education.
Ask the authorities to build the infrastructure, the PICUs, NICUs, building the infrastructure, neonatal intensive care units and pediatric intensive care units. So we should not lose the children. That is what Nalini has stressed.
Thank
you
very much, Dr. Srinivas.
Yes.
So,
yes.
Dr. Mohan? You are on mute, Dr. Mohan.
Firstly, congratulations to EFPS CPD for such a wonderful session. It was so well covered by Dr. Nalini and supported by the other experts. This was always a gray area in our practice. We have been treating pediatric COVID patients right from the first wave, even during second wave. In the first wave, though, we were fearlessly treating them. In fact, we didn't treat them at all. We were thinking that, okay, pediatric age group, they'll only end up with mild symptoms and they recover, and they were. And even the second wave, my experience has not been that bad. Most 99% of the children we have been treating as family physicians as part of the family. In the second wave, I've seen it is not sparing any members within the cluster or within the family. The children are invariably infected. And we have seen they've done exceedingly well. They've all recovered. But it's always a good idea to have an expert backup. So in the second wave, we started connecting with the pediatrician whenever there was a need. Like if the parents were very apprehensive, we used to advise them, please keep the pediatrician in the room. Otherwise, we didn't see much change in the way the children presented from first wave to second wave. And I agree with Dr. Srinivas that there is a need for parent education. So in fact, we have already started in AFPA Karnataka. Yesterday only, I just gave an awareness talk to a group of 400 people. In fact, we have made a template presentation, which can be used by all the AFPA members. We want to build on that. Parent education is really, really important in averting that impending third wave. Because this virus has been quite dynamic, and the more we think that we know about this virus and disease, it is giving us surprises. And it's very important that the general public also understand the disease process, and so that they don't seek care from people who are not qualified, or the self-treating and all those things. These are the things which have actually increased the case fatality rate in the second wave, in my opinion. We have seen that people who present late, reaching the hospital late, are the ones we are losing actually.
Thank you very much. Very important points, pertinent from the ground level. Anybody else? Last comment, and then we end for the day. It's been a long session, nearly an hour and a half, but a very useful session. Anybody else from the audience? Please unmute your mic and go ahead. First come, first served. Otherwise, you lose the chance. 3, 2,
Hi.
1.
I just wanted to say, I'm Dr. Nritya, I'm from Chennai, and I just wanted to say thank you so much for this session. It's been really great listening to all of you, and there is a lot of doubt because a lot of times we end up doing things because parents are pressurizing us. They are saying, you have to do this, you have to do that. And when they're giving the advice, I'm always wondering, am I giving the correct advice? Should I be saying something else? So it's really nice to get clarity on a lot of those topics. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nritya. Yes, the information is changing so much. that sometimes when the patients challenge us, we are in doubt ourselves. So what I have started saying is, this is my advice regarding the medications. You take these, rest, whatever you want to take, you take from the internet, from the newspaper, or any channel. That's up to you. But this is based on my information. And as of now, what I think is, because the doctors are a very rare and a precious commodity, and family physicians, since they are trained to be listening to all sense and nonsense of patients, very patient listeners, patients have the trust and confidence in them. So we can keep a lot of patients out of the hospitals, and especially where the resources of, say, other colleagues, like whether pediatricians or intensive care units, they are saved for the serious ones also. Okay, with that we end, and thank you very much all for today's sessions, especially Dr. Nalini, Dr. Kulkarni, Dr. Suhas, for joining us and giving your wisdom. Goodbye.
Thank you.
I should be thanking AFPI.
Thank you.
We want you to be associated in a further endeavors also.
Certainly. Yeah. I'll be in touch with Kamlesh, definitely.
Thank you, sir.
I have a lot. I've got a lot. It's a very good session. It's very nicely conducted by lecture by Dr. Nalini. And in most of nowadays, we are seeing most of the cases in OP only it's managed pediatric cases. Most of them, before they are hospitalized, they are well managed in OP itself. That is what I have been experiencing in my practice.
True.
And even as my husband is a pediatrician, we have been seeing so many cases in OP, well managed in OP itself. That's what I meant to say. Even in the first wave and also in the second wave, we could manage very well. And the hospital admissions were very few.
So thank you very much, Dr. Fanny. Your sound was pianoing, so it was sounding as you were singing. But what I got the impression is, yes, the more cases we see, the more confident we become. So in the past 2 years, we have got so much of wisdom in our practice that that's unmeasurable. Okay, thank you and good night. God bless you.
Thank you, Dr. Kamlesh. Thank you all.
Thank you.